Good evening, guys. Welcome to another session of Python Fundamentals. Today, we will be talking about an interesting subject or interesting area of programming in general and how we deal with it in Python. So we'll be talking about errors and exceptions and how you handle them in Python, right? So far, we have been working with code where we assume that we've been working in like a perfect environment where we assume there are no errors. The user will always enter the correct data format, right, for our program to work. So, however, that's not always the case. So let us move. So our learning objectives, as per usual, we're going to learn how to read, comprehend, trace, adapt, how to and create programs that use exceptions and exception handling. So what is an exception, right? An exception is an unexpected event that occurs during the execution of your program, right? They're otherwise known as logical errors, and these errors occur at runtime, i.e. execution of the program. So they are syntactically correct. They pass the syntax test, right? So you don't get an error like when you're writing the code, you're not going to see a red line that says, hey, there's something wrong with your syntax, right? So this is called a logical error, right? Now, if you look on the right-hand side, we have our code that says user, please enter your age. And just as we've learned from typecasting, we are going to try and convert this value that the user enters to an integer. So we kind of assuming that the user will always enter a number. But however, if you look at the block below, you see I entered a string, just a random string, GH, doesn't really matter. And then what happens is you get a trace back. I entered that and I get an error because how do you convert GH to an integer? It's not just possible. It's not possible because it's a character. It's letters, not an integer, not a number. So, and then you get an error. Python, essentially what happens is an exception object is created whenever a runtime error occurs. So whenever there is an error during the execution of your program, this exception object is created. And then, so if we don't handle this, we'll see a trace back to the error with details about the cause printed to the screen. So as you can see, this is where the error occurred on line 10, right? And it says that user age, that's the code that's causing the error because we got it and we have a value error, invalid literal, right? Invalid data, right? For or representation of data for int with base 10. So GH cannot be converted to a base 10 number. So we got an error. So other examples of when you would get an error include something like I'm trying to import a library that does not exist. We've not yet gone deep into modules and packages and importing, but we'll do so in the next section. Or something, another one would be where we're trying to divide a number by 0. As we all know, you can't do that. It's undefined or something. And then we try to perform a mathematical operation with the user input without typecasting, right? Something similar to this example here. However, we don't use an int, and sometimes maybe the user enters the correct, like a number, and then we try and do some mathematical operations with that. But remember, the input always returns a string. All right, so Python, right, has built-in exceptions. And essentially, whenever there's an illegal operation, the program will raise these exceptions, right? And there are several of them, built-in exceptions. You could also have a user-defined one, but I think for now, that's a bit more advanced. Let's just stick with the built-in exceptions. So like I mentioned before, a zero division error, when you try to divide a number by 0. A type error occurs when you perform an operation with a wrong data type. You attempt to perform it because it's not going to go through. And a value error is what we just got now, where you're trying to evoke a function with the correct type but inappropriate value, right? Attribute error and attempt to reference an attribute of a data type that does not occur, that's not there, all right, or has. So there are many, many more. You can check out on the Python documentation to see them. But now let us discuss how we handle them. So we're going to go and see. All right, so errors and exceptions. So essentially, the rule of thumb is that it's recommended, let me not say rule of thumb, it's a recommendation that programmers should avoid trying to handle errors as they're usually beyond the control of the program, right? Errors can arise from incorrect user inputs, corrupt data sources, and unintended program action, otherwise known as bugs. All right. Errors include things like compilation error, syntax errors. But what I meant to say was error. right? There's a typo there, excuse me. Error in the logic, infinite recursion. Remember when we've spoken about recursion, infinite recursion would occur if you don't have a terminating case, or otherwise known as a base case, to stop the recursive call. Okay, so however, Python or in programming in general, we can handle these errors, right? There's this saying where you have to handle it gracefully, or rather, let me say, a program should fail gracefully. So if a program does fail, we should handle it in a way that the user does not get this ugly traceback in the user interface, right? Okay. So how do we do that? So yeah, so how do we do that? Right? Python exceptions, right? So what happens is they abnormally terminate the execution of a program. So it is therefore important for us to handle exceptions, right? Like I said, you have to fail gracefully. Yeah, so by failing gracefully, instead of that traceback error, the user should get a clean message, okay? And we do this with a try and except block, right? So the try essentially, so we put in code in the try block, we put code that might create an exception that we're not sure, and then in the except, we execute code when an exception occurs. So if you look at this diagram, run this code, try to run this code, accept there's an error, execute when there's an exception, else. So there was no exceptions when we tried it, then run this code, and then always, so finally, always run this code. So there's the try, except, else. Finally, we will do this in the VS Code. I'll show you some examples. And our key takeaways: errors are usually beyond the control of the programmer. Programmers should not try and handle errors, but rather they should plan and try to catch and handle the exceptions that they think will occur. So that's where you have fail error cases where we try and test the possible errors that could occur in the program. All right. So let's move to Visual Studio Code. See you guys there later. Cheers. All right, guys, we are back. On Visual Studio Code, we're going to work with our errors. And if you remember, there are two main type of errors: error in the data, error in the code. Error in the data is where you have incorrect user inputs or corrupted data source. And then the code are essentially bugs, which is actually unintended actions that somebody has created into the program, right? The computer will always do what you tell it to do, okay? Now, now let's try and start working with error handling. Okay, so I'm just going to try and create an error, and the simplest one I can think of right now is let's just try and assign the result of this operation, the result of this operation to this variable called result. And as you can see, that passes the syntax test, and I'm saying pass result. And let me just clear our tuples exercises or dictionary exercises, Python errors, right? .py. And as you see, we get a division error, zero division error. Now, what would happen is, what would happen? Actually, let me show you how this could occur, because you're probably thinking, why would someone just try and divide 10 by 0, right? You know it's going to fail. So let's say you have a list. I'm going to call it data input, right? You scraped data from a website, and it's now stored in a list. And then I'm just going to create some random numbers. Not too random, but right. Okay. And then now you want to iterate through this list, right? For num in data input, right? You want to divide this value by you want to divide the data, right, by, let's say, a budget. So you have a number there. You're going to say this is budget, and you're going to say this is 1,000 rand, right? So you want to say, okay, for this each input, I'm going to divide by the budget, right? Which number I'm going to divide by the budget, and say that as a result, right? Result, and the result is going to be another list, right? Result list. Okay, and I'm going to say result is budget divided by num, right? And then we're going to say result dot list, not dot list, but result list dot append the results, right? And result, okay? So I'm gonna try and run this. And however, as you can see, somewhere along the line, we get a division by 0, okay? On line 5, okay? Which is somewhere there. And that's occurring because we have a 0 here. So what would we do? We would say try to do that, okay? And remember, except print error occurred. All right. And then result list. Okay. So what I am assuming, I'm not say assume, but what I want to happen is now what this does, whenever it says the error, it's going to print this out and then move to the next value. It's not going to stop the whole program. So let's just see it. And that's not what we want. We want that. There we go. So we had this happen, and fortunately, we're able to skip past the 0, okay, with the except. And if we look somewhere there, we should see error occurred, right? But this is not very informative. We don't know what type of error occurred. But now you see how we use the try and except block to handle errors, okay? Now, let's go back to our previous example with the access control, where we had somebody enter their age. So I'm gonna say try, and then user age is equals to int input, and then I'm saying please enter your age. Okay, and I want that to be on a new line. Okay, and then I'm gonna say check if user is allowed on site. All right, I'm going to say if user age is greater than 13, we print welcome to our site. We might have a community coming up soon where you can ask, you can interact with other programmers. If you're having any errors with your code, you can shout out. To us, it's going to be on Python and also other blockchain, web development and blockchain as well. But let's continue. And then we're going to have an except block that says print please enter a valid integer. All right. And that's not what I wanted to happen. Please enter your age. I'll say HJ. Please enter a valid integer. However, it ends the program. But now the user knows that, okay, they didn't enter a valid integer. So whenever they run that again, they will say, I am 15. And it says, welcome to our site. All right. Now, so far, we've been working with just general try and accept, and we haven't been actually catching specific exceptions or errors. Now, what I'm going to do is going to show you something. I'm going to say try. I'm going to create this variable, use the range, and I want all the even numbers between this range. Okay. And then I'm going to print even numbers. Let's get 12, right? I don't think there are 12 values in there. However, I'm going to say except. Now I'm going to say except a 0 division error. Okay. Print denominator cannot be, that's not, okay, yeah, cannot be 0, full stop. Right? Or you can even use another except. You can have as many except blocks as you want. Print index out of range, right? So that's what occurs out of bound when you try and access an index that is greater than what is currently in this list or sequence type, right? So let's see how that works. And you can see index out of bound because there aren't 13 items within this range, 13 even numbers. So we can try 7 and we will see it should work. Now, 16, great. We can try 18. Let's see what's the last number. in this range. Should be like 18 or so. 18 is the last number. Okay, if we want 20, we will go to 22 and 20. All right, so we can have as many branches as we want. So this one didn't catch it, so it's going to go into this one, and then there is something, there's a catch all, right? Catch all, there's something like that, except exception, right? So this will catch everything. You can say sorry, an error occurred, right? Please try again, or contact customer services or customer support, right? So the user doesn't get any tracebacks. All right, so now how I want to get this error out. So I'm just going to put in that, right? So this is a string as an index. This does not catch that, if I'm not mistaken. Because that is not going to catch that. So we put in the wrong type here. So I think that should be a type error or a value error, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so this didn't catch it, this didn't catch it, but this will always catch everything, right? Except exception. All right. So that's just the except block. We can try something else as well. Did I remove the user age? So let me just bring that back. There we go. All right, so here we are. Okay. Now, this is in the try. I can take this out, right, from there. And what I can do is, if this occurs successfully, I can use an else block and say, okay, and then run this code. So essentially, there was no errors, let's go here, right? That's what the else is for. However, if there's an error, it's going to go here. And then let's just run that. We're going to say P, please enter a valid integer, right? And then errors, I'm going to say, and you can see it jumps to our else. Now we have something called the finally block. It's optional. And what happens is this is always going to be executed regardless of if there's an exception or not. And I'm going to say finally print something polite. Thank you for coming to our site. That's traffic, you know, so that's cool. And we run. I create an error. Please enter a valid integer. Thank you for coming to our site. Right? It will always run, regardless of if it's an error or not. And let's see, I'll show you 18. Welcome to our site. Thank you for coming to our site. Right? All right, guys. This is just an introduction into errors and error handling in Python. I hope to see you again soon on where we'll be discussing modules and packages. Thank you very much. See you guys later. Cheers.